Welcome to another Top Lines and Tails podcast. This episode sees the start of a new series looking at the early origins of the continental breeds of livestock in UK. The Charolais breed was first imported into UK from France in the late 50s, but it was a while before it got its foothold in the industry. I'm pleased to have back on the programme for the second time Hector Campbell, long-time stockman with Major Walter's Balthaic herd in Perthshire, and Sandy Beaton, initially with the Fairthwaite Charolais herd. Welcome back, chaps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
And both of you guys will go back to the original imports of the breed, and both of you will probably been at sales in France and maybe bought cattle there. But before we look at these early imports, let me just talk through the origins of the breed in France. The home of the Charolais is in southeastern France, the small district of Charolais, in what we would know as Burgundy, also home to some excellent white wines. And they're believed to date back to the 8th century. The cattle, not the wines, or maybe both of them. I don't. It was the 16th century before anybody really noticed these cattle, when one chap called Claude Mathieu took some of them a few hundred miles west to the Neuve region, and not a million miles from where the Limousin cattle come from. And a few like-minded improvers set about them over there and called them the Nivermais, and a herd book was set up in 1864. And then the guys down near Charolais, they got their act together and started their herd book in 1880. And it took till 1919 before the two herd books could merge, which is quite a familiar story, fellas. I've seen this a lot of times. Hector, the origins of these strong cattle were for pulling ploughs, weren't they? So they would have some pretty hefty shoulders on them, these first cattle. And for them, it was all about size and weight and strength, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were a beast of burden, really, over in France. We had the Clydesdale horses, and I think they had the Charolais cattle to till their grounds. That's how I'm led to believe, anyway.
That's true, and that's why they were front-heavy cattle. And as somebody mentioned on a podcast recently, cattle naturally would be front-heavy if they weren't bred the opposite direction. Sandy, these first imports actually came in the late 50s when the Angus and the Shorthorn trade was flying, wasn't it? And they'd have gotten short thrift, wouldn't they, from the traditional cattle boys?
They were trying to import them when there was so much against them that they finally agreed to let the Ministry of Agriculture buy a string of bulls, and they would be put to the MMB for tests and trials. Tom Alsop was the Chief Livestock Officer for the Ministry of Agriculture, and he selected the original bulls.
That was a question I was going to ask you, Sandy, because the demand originally was from the dairy industries, so these cattle went to the Milk Marketing Board to get crossbred calves, didn't they? And again, it was
That's correct. They were dairy men, apart from my boss, Colonel Ogden, who was a founder member. They were all dairy men. Tony Harmon and all these people were dairy men, and the whole idea was to increase the beef output from the dairy herd.
That's right, and there was import licenses were applied for, putting pressure on the government, I think, which appointed a subgroup called the notorious Terrington Committee, and they eventually approved the import of bulls in 1962 so the Milk Marketing Board could use them, but they ruled out the import of females, didn't they? They weren't allowed in at all.
Well, no, but they had to be tested with these bulls that were bought by the ministry first. That was the whole exercise. There would have been no importation of anything if Tony Harmon hadn't have had a word with his friend Maitland Mackey, who was an MP and a Member of Parliament, and they got his permission through Parliament.
I've got a section of the meeting. It was actually John Mackey, Maitland Mackey's brother.
That's right, sorry, yeah.
And father of the current Maitland Mackey. They raised a motion in the House of Commons in the Ministry of Ag in 1963, and of course, as you said, he'd be a dairy farmer, but he talks about the Angus and the Shorthorn and the Herefords putting up an unfair fight to keep the Charolais out. And some of these breeds would have a lot of power in government, wouldn't they? They'd be titled peers amongst some of these Angus and breeders. And Mackey mentions corruption in the above committee and accuses the men who were against the breed, saying that they'd actually been using Charolais semen themselves, including the president of the Shorthorn Society, he says. So the whole thing was a bit of a farce, really. And he also goes on to say they'd got Charolais cattle in Canada 6 years earlier, and he'd threatened to go there and get genetics. I mean, he was stamping his foot, but they still weren't yielding. And again, on the minutes of this meeting, the opposition was somebody called Sir David Gibson Watt, and it's a name I recognise as a breeder of Welsh black cattle. He spouts about these animals bringing in disease, and they were pretty scared when they knew what was coming, didn't they?
Oh, there was all sorts of tales. There was leptospirosis, that was a scare about that, and they found that in. But you can really find that anywhere.
Eventually, the UK Society was formed in 1962 as the British Charolais Society, but they couldn't register females, so it wasn't really doing much.
No, but the wheels had been set in motion with the bulls coming in. I remember when I was in Aberdeen, Angus and Herefords in Warwickshire, and I used to rear about 500 calves a year on nurse machines. Mm-hmm. And I asked the man to get me a few Charolais calves, and I put them on a nurse cow. And I remember saying to my wife, if this is how they grow, it's time I was getting into the breed.
Certainly, as you said, they were unrivaled with the weight gain that they got. But
they grew like mushrooms.
But basically, the government, they're importing the bulls to use in these dairy herds, but they're not allowing the purebreds to be bred. I mean, it was farcical. If we just talk about some of those early bulls, there were bulls called Sucre and Salon, loosely translated as sugar and sitting room. It was a bull MMB Sylvian. I think they really got the breed noticed in the UK, along with MMB Argent and Suro and, of course, Occidental. These eventually would become household names within the breed, wouldn't they?
Well, yes, but before that there was sea bulls, Clovis, and Clovis was a pretty important bull. Uh-huh. But Argent was the bull that left a lot of good crossbred calves and also good purebred calves. He was a very influential bull in the early days.
Okay, and the first pedigree calf wasn't born in the UK until 1967, nearly 10 years later. And would that be at Mackie's maybe, at Westertown? Where was the first calf born?
No, that was born, Cross Lanes Crusader was the first calf registered in this country. Mm-hmm. And he was bred in Berkshire.
But the first calf born in Scotland was at Alec Anderson's at Burton, at Lawrencekirk, a famous shorthorn breeder.
Well, he was the man that bought Bent Carabiner for Mackie.
Yes.
Probably, apart from Tom Alsop in the early days, he was very revered by the existing Charolais breeders at that time.
And if we talk about some of those early pioneers in the breed, I've got a list of a few here. Bill Bruce at Balmoral would be in there early, as would Major Walter of Balsairk, and a bit before your time, Hector, I guess.
Kersnow would be before us, and the Mearns, which was Alec Anderson. The first importation of females we had were E's, got 4 E's in, and it'd be 1970, I think. We bought Henham Lodge Emperor in 1969 at the Royal Show. And the first females come in the next year.
Before that, Robert De Pass and Tony Harmon.
Oh, yes.
Colonel Log, they brought the A cows in.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning this. They weren't privately bought. They were bought by the commission, and they were allotted lot numbers and dispersed at quarantine. Therefore, it was very fairly done, and I don't think anything will have been done more fairly. Small people got good cattle because of the luck of the draw.
Okay, that certainly happened in some of the later breeds I do know, and the sheep as well. The cattle came to Newhouse, I know, because I remember speaking to a young Bob Adam, and he said he remembers as a boy having to chase the cows around with a stick to get them to calve. So I don't quite know when they were in, but again, it'd be late 60s or early 70s. And of course, there was Billy Turner. He would be a big player at Brampton, and he employed Benno, as we know. And of course,
that's right.
Richard.
Billy started his herd by default, really, and not disparaging to Billy. He's a friend of mine, but I worked for a man called Pantle, and we started a herd of Charolais, and we looked at a group of Charolais cows that were housed on down in Essex on I forget the man's name. We bought those cows, and my boss turned them up. He cocked on the sale, and Billy Turner's friend bought the cows, and he had an accident. He either got killed or he died or something. And so Billy bought them, and they were a lot of good cattle, and that was the foundation of Billy's herd.
And of course, young Richard Retty was there, and didn't Richard help you as well as a boy, Sandy? I think when you were at Colonel
Yeah, he
Ogden's.
did. Well, my boys and him grew up together almost. We had holidays, and he used to come to Fairthwaite. My boys used to go to where they lived at Malton.
Moving on a little bit, I mentioned the natives could be a bit hostile back then. I remember your pal, Big Fred Harrington, ripping into me just for having a Charolais cross calf at the West Mid show.
Oh, yeah, he didn't like him.
They didn't have much time for us, Hector, did they?
Not at
No.
all. No, he wore his heart on his sleeve, did Fred.
Well, I remember, my father, I was only 16. We went to Illis show the Saturday after we bought Hen and Lodge Emperor at the Royal Show, and we got dogs abuse because at that time, Ailith, it was a small local show, but it'd be 40 or 50 Angus and 30 Shorthorns, and we got dogs abuse, and one well-known Berkshire farmer, who shall remain nameless, told us we'd been better off buying a Frisian. He would do the same job. And he later judged Smithfield. So
Okay, that narrows him down. We'll not mention names. And you mentioned Tony Harmon there, whose son is the president now, of course, and there was De Cripney and, of course, Esmore Evans at Meardy in those early days, and Jim Goldie brought cattle in the late 60s. A lot of these good guys were in it from the start, weren't they?
Oh, yeah, Jim's been in it for a long time. I remember Jim and his showing Goldie's Judith at the Royal Show. Jays were 2-year-old at that time, but he would have been in before. I think his father would have been alive then.
Certainly got cows registered in 69, I think he has. I think I saw something.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of these cattle then, you guys would go out to France to buy these cattle, and the main was at Vichy, and that would be a fair occasion. I think it'd be a who's who and a bit of a party too, I would imagine, Sandy. Did you go?
It was a tremendous big show. And later on, they moved Vichy show up to Nevers, up to Manicours, and built a sale complex and had a sale there. Whether they still do, I don't know. But the show at Vichy was something to be seen. And I went several occasions. Mm-hmm. But on the Saturday, I can't remember how many heifer and bull calves. They were all calves on the Saturday. They were all on foster cows. You could tell they were all, what a whole lot of noise all day long, bawling for their milk. But there was some tremendous good calves and well brought out cattle.
And Hector, I think you went as well, didn't you?
Well, Sandy was there. The only time I went, Sandy, Fred Smith, George Young. There was a whole heap of stocksmen from Britain went across that year.
Yeah, that was the trip that Alison Mackay nicknamed it Sandy Beaton's Dirty Dozen. You were one of them.
I can imagine that would be some party.
It was a great trip. The standard of cattle was, as Sandy says, the calves were brought out to perfection and a sight to behold.
And of course, there was the trip to Paris show as well. I did that a few times, and I think the phenomenal food hall in Paris will feature in this series a few times. But did you guys get to the Paris show? That was an occasion.
Oh yes, I went once or twice. But they were all good cattle there, whichever breed it was, because they had to qualify. There was only so many places for them, each breed, and so you knew you were going to see champions from regions, and it was a tremendous show of cattle.
Still going on now. I think we're still qualifying. I used to go over there buying Blue Domains. That was our days, my father. And there'd be some party that everybody would be there in that food hall, all sitting about there trying some decent French wine. And we're on the subject of these early breeders, and of course we've got to move on to Ernie Dodd in Shropshire, and he's the man that everybody remembers with a prefix of Tatton Hall. And MMB Apollon was the sire of Tatton Hall Hublot, I think, and I remember him winning the Burke Trophy in 1977. Sandy, would that be right?
Yes, right. Well, I can tell you the first time when I was working with Pantol, we went to Fairthwaite to buy a heifer, and on the way home we called at Ernie Dodd's, and I think I saw the best field of bull calves I've ever seen. And they were all by Apollon out of imported French cows that he lost in a TB thing. He had to start it all over again,
I didn't know that.
He was a master breeder, Rowney Dodd, and also a very good judge, a very fair judge when he was judging a show. He didn't have favourites, he had good cattle at the top. He was a very, very good breeder of good cattle.
So we mentioned Tutton Hall, Hublot, and of course there was Impeccable we'll come on to in a minute, and they were both out of the same cow, Eclipse, and she was some cow. Didn't she share the Burke Trophy? Didn't Hublot and his mother win the Burke Trophy between them?
Yes, they did. And they also won champion and reserve at the Highland. Yeah. And I was on that Grand Parade that day, and the cow left everything in the Charolais breed in her shadows. She just marched on and left everything. And her bull, Hublot, was good on locomotion, but he couldn't keep up with his mother, and he was only 2-year-old.
I followed him round the Grand Parade at the Shropshire and West Midlands show, and yes, he could walk well, but you're right, she was a beast.
He was a good bull. I don't think she ever bred a bad one. I can't remember them all now, but I know Ernie transplanter at least once.
If we move on to a few other bulls, I'll mention a few. Cote Lizard bred a lot of good calves, I think. Again, was he an import, Sandy?
He was. I forget where he came from, but yeah, we needed to get them a bit bigger. The original bulls were a little bit on the short, dumpy side, and Cote Lizard and Impeccable later, and Lonsdale Harvest, and the bull that Laurie Shuttleworth bought from Vincent Nougat. They were all big bulls, and they were the bulls that made the difference to the breed.
Moving on, the sales started to come, and Kirksmere Festival was the first bull, I think, to hit the headlines at 10,000 in Perth.
Yes.
And then you sold Fairthwaite Ploughman. Were you involved then to the milk marketing board? When was that?
John Matley was the chief buyer for the milk board, and they wouldn't tell you whether they were interested or not. And he got that bull in Perth at auction. He wouldn't tell you whether they passed the test. So it was a fair way of going on. I'm not criticising it. So he got the bull for 2,800. And every time I saw John Matley, he said, just another half a dozen straws of seam and the bull's paid for itself.
Yeah, he wouldn't be long. He was certainly well used. And hey, it wasn't long before all the breed were hot property, was it? Let's just take a look back at some of those early females. Hector, you've got some pictures of some of these around. I think I'm going to mention some names. Fleet's Noisette and Nanette, and they were both daughters of Fleet's Imogen, I think. And she another import, was she?
No, she was out of an imported cow called Farandole that was bred by Philippot, and she was by Apollon.
Oh,
she was a very, very good cow.
And which one? One of them was the mother of both Fleet's Vibrant and Fleet's Rascal. And both of those won the Royal, I think, didn't they? I don't know which way around that was.
But twins, you see. Nanette and Noisette. Vibrant and the cow that we showed in the Burke Trophy for Stephen Butcher were out of twin sisters by Fairthwaite Jason, who was by Harvest.
You brought these out for the Royal, didn't you, Sandy? The Fleet's cattle out for the show at the Highland.
We did that year, yeah.
And did you have both cattle in the Burke? Was that? Did I remember you telling me that? No.
Yes.
So you had the male and female in the Burke. What year was that, Sandy?
88. We were in the Burke Trophy 87 with the man from Devon, his cow, and I think that was by Cote Lizard. And then the following year we had both cattle in the same trophy.
Excellent.
And we won both years.
2 years back to back. That's some record.
I was just going to say, Alan Drysdale at Blairgowrie, he bought Fleet's Vibrant Seaman at the Fatarini sale, and he's done exceptionally well for him.
Well,
now in present times, because he seemingly a very easy calving bull. And
he was. Well, the secret with Vibrant was they always calved on time. They didn't run over. But I remember telling David Fatarini when I retired, don't stop using that semen because a good bull like that is bound to breed. You can't ignore the good cattle. You just can't afford. And the back breeding, the females, as Andy pointed out, with the Imogen and the Farandole cow that was imported from France, were all good cattle. Can't get away from female lines. You must have them.
So we mentioned Impeccable, and yeah, he set the breed going, didn't he? He really bred females, didn't he?
Well, he bred everything, but he was the bull. No doubt about it. I mean, I've been retired now for quite a few years, but I've never seen any consistency like he could produce.
And Impeccable was the sire of Lappingford Tulip, and they went to Esmore Evans, and I think she was out of Cote Iris. Iris was born in 73, and Cote Iris would have been flushed by Esmore at the end of the 70s, and I think there were 32 registered calves off of Cote Iris, including Tulip, and of course Mary Victorious, her full brother, who went to another top breeder, Neil Massey.
Yes, and I bought a bull out of that flush for Fairthwaite, along with Stephen Butcher.
Mary Victorious is another bull who bred over 1,000 progeny.
Oh,
1,350 or something.
Very good breed in that.
Yeah, he bred very well. He did the breed a lot of good.
I spoke to Neil a while ago, and Neil went into the Charolais, I think, in 1974, he told me, and he bought all the cattle from Maitland that we were talking about at Westertown.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
Yes.
And chatting about Esmore, again, with the females, he had Empress and Tulip and Umbrel, I think, and show team of three of them, and they were some setup that was.
Well, he showed a 3-year-old, and I don't remember its name when, I think it would be the first Royal that Peter Donger's cow won. A very good 3-year-old cow. It was somebody. No, he bred tremendous, the bull. He really bred well.
And another cow I remember was Livermere Susie. She won her fair share. She might be a little bit later, maybe, was she?
Well, that was probably the best show cow out of them. The only thing was she didn't breed as well as her grandmother, but Livermere Susie was some animal. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very correct and true and big.
Big. She was huge. And she won the Burke as well, I think, didn't she, Sandy?
Yeah.
Hector, any other cows I should mention? You've been having a look through the record books going back the way. Is there anybody I've missed out?
Mount Pleasant had a Charolais cow, that 3-year-old cow that won the Highland early on. They must have bought John Allison's cattle, did they?
They did, yes.
Because they were hard to beat about the Highland show.
They were hard to beat anywhere. But
yeah.
There's one cow we haven't mentioned, and she was bred in France and imported by Laurie Shuttleworth as a heifer, and then Alan Goodland won the Royal with her. Mike Handel showed it for him. Sagesse, Mount Pleasant Sagesse. She was a great big good cow, and by a very good bull. The best bull ever I saw in France, called Echo.
This is fun. Should we mention a few bulls now? I'll throw a few names in. Newtham's Regal did a lot of work with Thrunton, I think, and he was by a Fairthwaite bull, wasn't he, Sandy?
Newtham's Regal?
Yes.
He was by Fairthwaite Magic.
Moving on, in the bulls in 1978, Mains Olympus set the breed record of 28,000, which stood for a while until...
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And that stood for a while until Balmoral Champion then made 33,000, I think.
Yes.
Then, of course, we move on to Mary Director at 58,000, last sale of the Old Mart, and another impeccable bull, of course, out of a Côte Lizard cow, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a story there we could dwell on. I think the guys that bought him had a few financial issues, should we say, and I think there was a bit of a stooshy around all that in the end. And I heard tell that Jack Young wishes he'd ever seen the sight of him, but he...
Jack Young brought him to Fairthwaite, and I sold him about half a dozen females, that man. Very good females, and one of them topped the sale at 9,000 at his dispersal.
Whiston Estates, is that right we're talking?
That's right, yeah.
But Esmore, to be fair, won all 3 sections that year, didn't he? And I think that was judged by a Frenchman. I can't remember his name. Probably the first Frenchman to have judged Perth.
Yeah, Albert Raymond.
That's the man. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was a tremendous sale all through that day. It was unbelievable. Was there about 300 bulls or something? It was an amazing show of cattle and a great sale.
I was there. I had Simmental cattle there, but I remember the buzz about the place, and maybe because it was going to be the last sale in the Old Mart, but it certainly was atmospheric, to say the least. And obviously we can't forget the Irish boys, Cyril Miller and the crowd. They were big players as well, weren't they? And wasn't there a Brampton bull over there in Ireland that bred everything? Can you?
Yeah, Brampton Petition.
Petition, that's him.
Would he be a grandson of Impeccable?
There would have been Impeccable in him anyway, Sandy. I'm sure of that.
Probably he was probably by Impeccable.
Possibly, and certainly, as I said, those boys, when they brought the bulls over, they brought some good cattle, and they were hard to...
yeah.
Killad's and...
Well, there was the Mulligan brothers.
Yeah.
They were quite accomplished cattlemen.
They certainly were. Cattle and sheepmen and anything men, weren't they? And they still are. Some of them still are anyway in that. And, moving back, should I say, to the Royal, the Charolais won the Burke 17 times in all, Sandy. And you had a hand in a couple of those. How many did you get involved in? Just the two?
Two.
Mm-hmm.
Two.
They certainly were hard to stop for a number of years.
They were the breed. It's sad to see how they've lost a bit of ground, but I don't know why that is. I mean, I've been retired 20 years and I don't go to these big sales anymore much, but at one time of day, they were the dominant breed.
Some of those bulls would be massive, though. I remember them being giants, and they'd take some feed in, though, Sandy, wouldn't they? They wouldn't be that easy fed. You'd put some food into them.
Yeah, but they look as if they put more into them now. Because they're hellish fat now, a lot of these bulls of all breeds. You just had lib feed and you wouldn't know how much they eat.
True enough. And I mentioned David Benson earlier on because he was stockman at Brampton, and then he took over as a secretary. He was some character, wasn't he? Who did he take over from? Who was in there before him?
I think his name was Evans, a Welshman.
Selwyn, somebody, Sandy?
Selwyn Evans, was it?
He was only there about a year, I think.
Aye, that's right. And then Benno applied. I was on the council that appointed Benno.
We'll just talk about Benno for a minute or two. As I said, some character, but he had the charger, and he knew where the breed was going, and he knew how to handle people as well. And he was a long time in that post.
He was a very good man at whatever he did. He was a good man at Billy Turner's. He was a very good secretary.
You mentioned that you were on the Charolais board, Sandy. What were the men like on the board then? They'd be a bit of a mixture on there, would there?
Oh, there was, yeah. I had to keep my trap shut if I didn't know too much. I was more on the practical side. But, Major Walter was one of our chairmen. Colin Campbell was another. I was on 6 years.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we had 6 chairmen. They're all good men, and we had one or two problems, this pole problem. That took a bit of sorting out. You don't hear about it now. They had identified them, and like the Hereford World did, and you could take your pick. If you see them in the pedigree and you don't want one, well, you don't have it. If you fancy one, well, you get it.
Where did that pole come from?
Well, it come out of Canada originally.
Speaking of polled ones, and we have a couple of polled bulls for Stirling this weekend. So shows how much things has turned.
Yeah.
I certainly remember Avril Evans down in Wales, and Avril and I did some business with sheep, and Avril having polled Charolais down there, didn't she?
Yes, myself and Neil Massey and Frank Bowley bought the top price cow at their sale, and each flushed it, had one flush out of it.
Uh-huh. Going back to Perth, the numbers were getting up, and you said 300. I think probably nearer 400 at some of those Perth bull sales, weren't there?
I can remember one year there was 150 bulls between our second last bull and our last bull. It was about 7 o'clock at night before the sale finished. You can get up to a lot of mischief in 3 hours waiting for one bull.
Talking about getting up to mischief, we chaps have all had a chat about the Royal Smithfield show, and of course the Charolais got to dominate there, didn't he? And a few bulls such as Fairthwaite Plowman we've mentioned, and Kirksner Festival, Westertown Gem from Maitland Mackey, of course, and Allenfold Vagabond. And Sandy, you had your share of winnings with the Charolais down there, didn't you?
Yes, we did very well with the crossbreds out of their own crossbred herd and with the Pewers latterly. But to tell you a little amusing story, one year Alistair Mackay was saying, well, we've had a good year again, boys. And that Similtal secretary said to me, it was like a bloody teddy bear's picnic in there with all the yellow fluffy cattle,
They certainly were pretty cattle, those silver cattle.
Andy, I'll go back. It's a bull you didn't mention earlier because the Scottish Milk Marketing Board had their own Charolais bulls up here, and there was a bull, Suji, in 1972 For David Sinclair, he sired the baby beef champion, the seniors, the reserve champion heifer, and the reserve overall in the show.
Really?
So that was the bull Suji from the Scottish Milk Marketing Board.
Certainly is a name I remember seeing.
He had a big influence in the breed commercially up in Scotland.
Andy, I would just like to mention the biggest turning point in my experience in the commercial side of the Charolais breed was Bobby Robinson had an open day, and half of Scotland must have went to it, and a lot of bulls got used commercially after that. Bobby started to use Charolais bulls and sell the calves at Reston instead of Wooler or wherever he did, and Reston became the hotbed for store cattle at that time. But then he had this big open day, and I didn't go to it. Well, I was in the breed at the time, but I didn't go to it. But a lot of my friends from Scotland and all over went, and they said, what a show of calves. It really turned the screw on a lot of other breeds, you know.
You're dead right, and my father used to go up to Reston and buy 2 or 3 floatloads of cattle at the time, and I went up there with him and remember seeing Bobby Robinson's cattle, and he'd have 100 head of store cattle in
That's right,
the one sale, and my father judged it the one year, and he said you couldn't see past him. He was tremendous.
I was at that open day, Sandy, with my father and Jimmy Tate, and it was a great show. A great credit to the man and the breed. Like, it was absolutely tremendous.
And would a lot of those calves, they would be by Argent, were they? By AI Argent. I'm sure he used another bull called Bent Mithras.
Yeah, he was a Scottish Milk Marketing Board bull, I think, if I remember correctly, as well.
Bent Mithras was bred well at Bobby Robinson's, both pure and crossbred. That was one of the big turning points in persuading people to use Charolais bulls. But of course, a lot of established hounds, we had an open day at least once every year at Fairthwaite and open to all comers, just purely to promote the breed. Let people see the calves out of different types of cows. I mean, we had a lot of Galloway cows and we had a lot of Irish cows. We had about 180 crossbred cows.
As you said, that gave you a few to pick from when it came to the fat stock shows, especially out of the Galloways.
Exactly. I mean, we never bought a fat stocker. We only produced the top end of our suckler calves.
The Kaelin bull you had, Sandy, bred a lot of good cattle.
Oh, yeah, but he was an imported bull from Mercier. Tom Alsop would have a lot to do with buying that bull. He was there when I got there, but he was a very true good bull. And a good carver. I once turned him out with 80 cows. It's a lot, I know. It sounds a lot. 80 crossbred cows, and he served every one, and I didn't carve one calf.
Wow,
how's that? That was only 1 year, mind, but that was a year. It was a good year.
I can hear a lot of people disbelieving you. I'm glad you said it was only 1 year, but that's a tremendous feat.
Oh, well, it's true. You get these once-in-a-lifetime animals. If you live long enough.
And moving a bit more modern day now, Hector, you're still involved with Balthic. And,
Semi-retired.
Tracy Gunn manages the herd now, I think, doesn't it? It's a big herd of Charolais there now. How many is there now?
We have about 100 pure breeding cows and 150 cross cows.
Right. And you guys have come to the top certainly in the last year or two. I think you've had the top price a few times, a top average a couple of years ago, if I remember right.
To be honest, I was having a look back the records, and our first bull sale was 1973, and we haven't missed a February or October sale since then.
Wow.
And we've had the top average several times. But 2018, we sold 9 bulls to average 15,600. That's a one-off here. That doesn't happen every year, but it makes up for the disappointing years.
It certainly was. I think it was probably as a record average, I would say.
Esmer had a great average the year he sold director. He was, at that time, he was up about 13 or 14,000. But for 9 bulls, it's a big average.
It is, and I'm right in thinking Balthic won the Highlander, the last Highlander, I think, didn't?
With a heifer by Hofmeister, which is going back a bit as well. I can't remember the year we bought him, but he's been dead a long time.
Did you buy him? I remember being stalled with cattle in the next pen to him, and everybody's coming along looking at this bull, and I couldn't understand what they were looking at. So coming to buy him I must have known nothing about it because he made about 30,000. I think. Did you guys get him? Did you?
A third. Goldie had a third, and Bill Bruce had a third on sale day.
The heifer won in 2019. Didn't she go on to win the Scottish Farmer Champion of the Decade? Am I right thinking?
I think she was third or something in the Champion of the Decade, but she's calved and has a very good bull calf at foot. Well, not at foot, it's weaned now. The sire of the calf is Barbican Lancer, a bull that we've used for years.
Oh, that's years ago, that.
Aye, but we still have semen, and she has a very good calf. He's so easy calving. We have a son of his that serve the cross heifers with.
Yeah.
Because he's easier calved to the cross cattle than any other breed we've tried, because we've tried other breeds. But so, as you say, you get these good calving strains, and Barbican Lancer's passed it down through the generations, and he's been a great servant because he only cost $3,500 when he was bought.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Hector, I'll maybe start with you. The best Charolais female, the best Charolais that you saw, would that maybe be the one that you won that Champion of Champions with, was it?
That was ours, but the cow that's left the lasting impression on me was Tattenhall Eclipse from way back. I was only 16 or 17 when she was shown, and I thought she was a tremendous beast. But that Baltic Nessie's her name, and she's won everything as a 2-year-old, so is there any point in bringing her out again?
Probably not. Sandy, I'll move on to you. The best, I'll give you both of them, the best bull and the best female that you've seen in the Charolais breed.
Well, I think that Tattenhall Eclipse in this country. In France, I would say Vincent Hardy, which was the mother to Mount Pleasant Nougat, was a tremendous good cow, and she would be Paris champion and Vichy champion in her day. And the best bull would be Echo in France. So he was a very good bull and very correct and true and big. You know, it's not always easy getting a big beast so correct.
And some of the early Charolais didn't have a reputation for being the most correct, but obviously they weren't letting the best ones out of the country as well. That's often been the case, hasn't it?
Yeah, that would be right. Well, if you want to keep a good herd, you don't sell your best females, do you?
A couple of names I've got here, Kilkenny Celia and Cambus Baron Fay, both later on, I know, but hot favourites amongst a lot of people. There were a couple of good show cows, weren't there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They had their day, and you can only beat what's in front of you. And they did it. I mean, Celia's track record is tremendous.
Well brought out by Jimmy and kept at 12 o'clock on the right days. And
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And chaps, I've had enough of your time. Anything else you want to tell me about the Charolais breed before we wrap this one up? A tale or two, a story or two?
I'm going to mention a Baltic bull that was sold to the Milk Marketing Board, Baltic Champion. Just tonight I found in one of the newsletters, sired over 150,000 calves in its time, and 1,000 pedigree calves were registered off him. He was the only Charolais bull at the Milk Marketing Board that's never been off collection. Wow. They collected 250,000 doses of semen off him.
I don't think anybody would argue with those results. I mean, they're pretty good as that.
He fair paid for himself, eh?
Yeah.
I remember judging farms for the Yorkshire Agriculture Society a few years ago, and the farm that won it that year, it was a very, very good farm, obviously, but they had a suckler herd, and that man used all that Baltic bull semen on about 90 cows, and he had all live calves that particular year.
Sounds like he did well. What did you call him again?
Baltic Champion. I just come across it tonight in a Charolais newsletter. The Milk Marketing Board did an obituary sort of thing for him.
What was his father, Hector?
He was out with a cow that we showed, but he was buying a homebred E-bull, Snipe House Bottom. He won his class at the October Bull Sales, the father of him anyway. And
you remember he plays tricks on you when you get in front of this thing?
Yeah. Once you get past 60, Sandy, it's...
Oh, well, I'm well past that.
But that would be the most famous bull Baltic ever sold for the amount of calves.
Yeah, indeed, a hell of a record. Chaps, I've had enough of your time now. Hector, I'll wish you and both there good luck at the Sterling sales coming up this week, and hopefully we'll see some shows fairly soon, and towards the end of this year we should all be allowed back out again, and let's get together and have a dram. Sandy, I
Yeah.
really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your history going back in the breed. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Hector, thanks for your time, and as I said, good luck with the Bulls this weekend.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy. Pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Right, cheers. Bye.
Cheers, fellas. Thank you for listening to our Top Lines and Tails podcast. You may like to take a look at our Top Lines and Tails Facebook page as well, where you'll find some photographs to back up this episode, as well as many more photos and discussions on similar topics.